where does the fact that we need to act or should act in certain ways as opposed to others come from? Why does it matter how we act? Why isn't any way of acting as good as any other? And so the question is, what facts of reality give rise to the need for acting in certain ways as opposed to others, for living our lives in certain ways as opposed to others? And then if we understand that, and we have some view about when you're entitled to introduce, or when it's necessary to introduce new concepts, we think about ought and should concepts as being introduced to capture the fact that certain facts give rise to a need for us to act in one way rather than another. And so what are the facts that give rise to that need? And what's the constellation of things? Well, basically, it's that living things, their lives are conditional. In order to continue to exist at all, they need to act in certain ways rather than others. If they don't act in the right way, if they don't act in a certain way, a way that the need to act that way is built into their nature as the kinds of creatures they are, then they won't be able to continue existing at all. And now for human beings, we have a choice. Other living organisms automatically act in the way that is required by their nature for them to survive. They have some mechanism in them, their genes or their pleasure-pain mechanism, that directs them towards certain ends, those ends that it's necessary for them to pursue in order for them to live. But human beings, our actions, our course through life is selected by our minds, by reason, and reason doesn't function automatically. And so we don't have an automatic course of action we pursue. We can pursue the course of action that is required by our nature to sustain us, or we can pursue a contrary course of action, any of the infinitely many contrary possible courses of action, which will harm us, which will not sustain us, which won't cohere into a self-sustaining life. And so given that this is the form of consciousness and of directing mechanism we have, there's a need for us to figure out how we're going to act. And the very facts that give rise to the need to figure out how we're going to act make it the case that if we choose to live, if we choose to seek anything out of life, then we're going to have to create our values and craft our lives and conduct ourselves in a certain manner, the manner that's necessary for a human being to sustain himself by his nature. And then that gives rise to the concept of should, to a standard of values where man's life is the ultimate value, and to a moral code that articulates what a human life requires. And it does that in the form of listing virtues and values.
Onkar?
Yeah, I think I have a certain view of Hume and what he's doing and the psychology involved. And I ran very interesting things to say about Hume. I think it's important, if we're taking this as the sort of the locus of the is-ought problem in Enlightenment thought and then bleeding into the modern period, it's a sort of throwaway in Hume. It's at the end of a chapter, it's a couple of paragraphs. It's, by the way, you might find this interesting. If you read these texts, it's is, and then it's all of a sudden ought. And if you think of what he's rebelling against in a positive way is the religious mentality. There's a real element, I think you should read it as, people trot out all these duties and then say you ought to do this and you have to. And there's an element of, who's going to make me do it? You can't coerce me by an argument. And there's something right in that perspective. In the way it's in Atlas Shrugged, they're on strike in the name of a single axiom: existence exists, and a choice, which is the choice to live. And you can't get underneath that and make somebody do something absent his choice. This is, again, the reason why the view of free will and objectivism, it permeates everything, including the foundations of ethics, that it has to be chosen. And in that sense, when we're talking about moral values, you can't get underneath that, and you can't derive an ought from an is if that means, if the sort of the picture of that is we're going to get away from or abstract away from choice. I think the view rightly is you can't do that.